guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my March wrap-up video. I've got 6 books to talk about. I do have a 7th book that I probably will finish today, but I'll probably talk about that one in my April wrap-up just so I can get this video out there so I can finally try and start being up to date. So in the month of March I had 1 3-star book, 4 4-star books, and then 1 4.5-star book. So overall I had a really good reading month. A lot of books that I really loved. Unfortunately none of them were 5-star, however one of them did come very close. So the book that I gave a 3 out of 5 was A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. When I was a teenager I read Patrick Ness's trilogy, the one that starts with The Knife of Never Letting Go, and I absolutely adored that book. And then I've never read anything of his since, and then I finally got to A Monster Calls because my library has it on audio, and I've been listening to audiobooks basically the whole month. I think I said this in my February wrap up, but I've been super busy at the minute. I'm going on holiday in May and I'm doing all the overtime that I can possibly do in order to get some money for it. So yeah, I've had barely any time to physically read. I've just been relying on audiobooks on the way to work, and also sometimes I can get away with it when I'm working if it's something that doesn't require my full brain capacity. I saw that this one was really short on audio. I think it was only 3 to 4 hours long. I've been talking about this book for ages and I haven't even said what it's about. So we're following this boy called Connor, who I think he's probably about 13, I can't exactly remember. His mum is sick and she's not responding very well to her treatments. So Connor has a lot of anger in him and a lot of frustration, and he has this recurring dream every single night, and it doesn't really say what this dream is, but it's something that Connor keeps very deep within himself. However, one night this kind of creature, he is basically fashioned on an oak tree, this really big tree-like figure comes to Connor's window and demands that he tells him the truth. And then we follow Connor's life as he goes to school. He's having a really hard time at school. We see how he deals with his mother being sick. We also see his kind of friendship with this tree-like monster. So I thought I would be way more emotionally invested in this book than I actually was. I feel a lot of the reviews I see about this book are 5-star glowing reviews saying how emotional it is and how it made people cry. I do agree that it's very emotional, however I didn't cry, and I kind of finished it thinking this was just okay. I do think it's a really important book though. I think it will be really good for teenagers to read if they're going through a similar situation to Connor. I feel it really goes into how angry he is and how frustrated he is at life in general, and I feel that kind of perspective could really help someone who's going through that situation in real life. And I think it also said quite a lot about grief, about loss, and about what it's like to have someone in your family who is really ill and not being able to really do anything to help them. So I think it really touched on all those things really well, and I really liked Connor as a character. I'm not entirely sure why I wasn't emotionally invested in this book. Maybe it's because it was so short. However, I do remember thinking that it felt longer than it actually was, but I did feel emotional at the ending, although I would have liked to have been sobbing on the floor. I think it would be really good to read in schools or have this book in school libraries because I do think it would resonate with a lot of people. And yeah, overall I liked it, but I didn't love it, so I just gave it a 3 out of 5. The first 4-star book that I listened to was The Cheerleaders by Cara Thomas. This is the 3rd book that I've read by Cara Thomas, and it is definitely my favourite. In this book we're following this girl called Monica. She goes to this school where they no longer have a cheerleading squad because 5 years ago 5 of the cheerleaders died in very quick succession, some of them under suspicious circumstances. So the school just decided it was best to disband the cheerleading team as a whole because it was too painful for people to think about. Our main character, Monica, is the younger sister of one of the girls who died, and her death was believed to be a suicide. But Monica is struggling to believe that her sister's suicide was actually a suicide. 2 of the cheerleaders were killed in a tragic car accident, and then 2 of them were killed by, I think it was the boy who lived next door to one of them, and he'd broken in and killed them both. Monica just has a lot of unanswered questions. She's just wondering what actually happened to her sister because, like I say, she doesn't believe that she would have actually committed suicide. She ends up making friends with this other girl in the school, and they kind of go on this little investigation together. This book was a lot of fun. It was very YA, very twisty, but it was exactly what I wanted. This book was actually quite dark for YA. It has a lot of different trigger warnings, but I think it dealt with them all really well. I thought it dealt with the suicide element really well as well. It went in a direction that I didn't expect, but I actually really appreciated where it went. We do get to follow a dual timeline where we're following Monica and then we're following her sister Jen 5 years in the past. I'll be honest, some parts of Jen's story were a bit confusing to me. I don't know if I was getting distracted or just confused or what, but she was falling out with some of her friends and I just didn't know which friend was who. I don't feel they had big enough personalities for me to be able to distinguish them, so I did feel Jen's perspective was a little bit jumbled up for me. This is the first book that I read in March, so almost a month later, some of the plot points are a little bit hazy for me now. However, I remember really liking it at the time. I especially liked the final twist, or like the final chapter. That was really, really good. And overall, this is just a perfect, fun, fast little YA thriller. I always think they're really good to break up some of my like heavier books because I feel like it just refreshes me a little bit and it just gives me that fun reading experience that I love. So yeah, if you're in the mood for a fun YA mystery thriller, I would definitely give this one a go. The next book that I also gave a 4-star to was When They Find Her by Leah Middleton. This is another book that I listened to on audio, and the concept for this book is just so good. We're following this woman called Naomi who has split up with her husband and they've got this child together. For some unknown reason, Naomi's ex-husband doesn't let Naomi look after the child overnight, and this is the first time that she's going to have her overnight since they've split up. So Naomi's really excited about this. She thinks this is the time where she can prove herself and, you know, redeem herself in her ex-husband's eyes. However, the night ends with a really tragic accident, and rather than just coming clean about what has happened, Naomi panics and decides to report her daughter as missing. This opens a whole new can of worms because there's police swarming the house, there's this massive investigation started, but we know that Naomi is lying the whole time. She seems to be like an unreliable, morally grey narrator, which I absolutely love. It just feels like the stakes are really high and everything's really stressful, and I just really loved it. I ended up really liking Naomi and I really wanted things to go well for her. There were some points where I was so angry for her, so even though Naomi was a very morally grey character, I still felt very like attached to her. This was one of those audiobooks where I think I sped through in like 2 days. I just couldn't wait to keep on listening to it. However, the ending was slightly unbelievable. I did have to suspend my disbelief at some points. However, I thought it all came together really well. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5. If you like thrillers where you're reading from an unreliable female narrator and it has a really dark concept, then I would definitely recommend this one. Ooh, the next book I actually have with me. This book is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This one is a adventurous sci-fi thriller. We're following this guy called Jason and he lives with his wife and his child. He used to be, well, he still is, but he used to be a really talented physicist, and he reached a crossroads in his life where it was either continue down this physicist route or start a family. And he decided to start a family. He's loving his life, he's having a great time. However, one day he's just walking around minding his own business and he gets kidnapped by some unknown person. Then he wakes up strapped to a gurney and they're saying, "Welcome back, Jason." And they want to know everything about his life. They want to know how he got back. And he just has no idea what's going on. He soon realises that in this world that he's woken up in, he doesn't have a family and he instead pursued this physicist route, and he invented this really, really advanced technology which has enabled him to go to alternate realities. This book is so fast-paced, so twisty, really clever, and it just feels so broad. Like, the scope is huge. Because Jason doesn't know why he's in this new world. He doesn't know if this world is his real world. He doesn't know how to get back to his old life. The whole thing is just really stressful and confusing. It kind of reminded me of The Running Man a little bit by Stephen King. It just has a similar tone to it. I found it so interesting to read about all these different realities that Jason could go to and how they could get there, and the whole thing was just really, really interesting. There is a twist in this book that actually got me quite emotional because thinking about the consequences of this twist was just really sad. It puts a whole new like emotional level on what was happening, and it was just really sad to think about, and I really, really cared for this main character. My only criticism of this book is that it wrapped up a little bit too easily, I think, and I do have a lot of questions now I think about it. I'm not even sure if I would want the answers, but yeah, overall I really enjoyed this book. Very twisty, very clever, just one of those books that you can get through really, really quickly, and yeah, overall I'll give it a 4 out of 5. The most recent book that I just finished was also on audio, and that was The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. We're following dual timelines, one in the 80s where we're following this girl called Viv. She's essentially ran away from home and she kind of stumbles across this place called the Sundown Motel, and she just ends up working there. It was never her plan, but she ends up working there doing the night shift. And then 35 years later, so we're in like 2017, we're then following Viv's niece Carly, and she is investigating her aunt's disappearance. So her aunt was last seen at the Sundown Motel in the 80s and she hasn't been seen since. So Carly in the present day decides to go to the Sundown Motel and basically do her own little investigation as to where her aunt could have gone. I thought this book was really atmospheric, very spooky. I loved the motel setting, I loved the small town vibes. It also has some paranormal elements which I really enjoyed, and they were quite light. I don't really like overly paranormal stuff, but I thought it worked really well in this book. I thought the female side characters were really, really good. They were fully fleshed out, fully realised, and they were like actual meaningful characters. I did see one of the twists come in, to be honest, but the other one I didn't expect at all. I really liked how it all ended and how it wrapped up. My only criticism is that the dual timelines sometimes got a little bit confusing. Sometimes I would forget who I was actually following because they are very similar. They're both following girls who are working the night shift at the Sundown Motel. They're both figuring out the same information, just at very different times. And sometimes I'd forgot like who found out what. They were both talking to a guy and I'd forget which guy was in which timeline. So sometimes it did get a little bit confusing. I don't know if that's because I was listening to it, but if anything that helped because I was able to tell who it was because of the voice change. And also when they were talking about the different victims in this book, again I was getting a little bit mixed up between them. So I'm not sure how clear it was, but yeah, maybe I'm just not good at listening to dual timelines because I had this issue with Mondays not coming as well. Although I feel like this doesn't usually happen to me, so maybe they just are confusing. Who knows? But overall, I really enjoyed this book. It was very atmospheric, very spooky. I loved the motel serial killer vibes and the 80s. I think the 80s timeline was my favourite because I did prefer Viv slightly more to Carly. I have seen that Simone St. James has a new book out. I think it's called The Book of Cold Cases. So I might give that one a go because I did really like this one. I think I'll just see how the reviews are. So yeah, definitely recommend if you like ghostly serial killer vibes. And then the last book I'm going to talk about is my 4.5 star book, and it's probably my favourite book of the month, and that one is Watch Her Fall by Erin Kelly. In this book we're following Ava, who is the top ballerina at this really prestigious ballet company. Her dad is also the director of the company, and she's worked her entire life to get to where she is, and she's just been cast as the lead role in Swan Lake. Obviously she's really happy about this, it's literally everything that she's ever dreamed of, but then she starts getting a little bit paranoid because things start going wrong around her and she feels like someone is trying to like knock her off her top spot, steal her role, something like that. This book was so good. It was really well crafted, it was so clever, and it is one of those books where it makes you feel like you've been reading it wrong the whole time, and that is like my favourite thing in books. I loved the backdrop of this ballet company. It was like the perfect thriller setting because I never realised how competitive, ambitious, how like cutthroat ballet can be. I was really interested in their lives and how controlled they were in this company, their diets, their exercise. I never realised how grueling ballet was. It really was a perfect setting for a thriller because you completely understand why the main character was so paranoid. All I will say about this book is that you do see the perspective shift a little bit, and every time that happened I was just mind blown. There were so many twists in this book which were genuinely shocking. I loved seeing how all the little pieces came together at the end. Like all the little things that didn't make sense at the start all of a sudden made so much sense at the end. I do think this is probably one of the most clever thrillers I've read. It kind of reminded me of The Last House on Needless Street. It's nothing like that really, but they both have that feeling of things don't really make sense at the start and then all of a sudden at the end everything comes together and you're like, wow, this author has thought everything through and every little bit ties up, and it's just so good. The only thing that stopped this from being a 5-star is because when I finished it, it didn't feel like a 5-star read because it took me over 2 weeks to read this book. I don't know why. Maybe I was in a bit of a slump, I'm not sure. Also the ending, I liked the ending, don't get me wrong. However, is it what I would have wanted? I'm not sure. But other than that, this book was so good. Probably one of the best thrillers I've read this year, if not in general. So this book gets a very well-deserved 4.5 out of 5, if not like 4.75. It was so good. I feel like a lot of people will give this a 5-star. It was just so interesting to see that world that I've never really looked into before. I've never really heard a lot about it, and yeah, it was just, the whole thing was just so interesting. It's so good. Definitely recommend it. And that is all of the books that I have to talk about today. Thank you for watching this video. Give it a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you want to see more, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye!